We are on the cusp of Apple making two new products that call into question the future of the iPad. The first is the iPhone Ultra, which is rumored to be released at the iPhone event in September. And if you've been living under a rock and haven't heard of this thing, this will be Apple's first foldable iPhone that, when unfolded, will be a similar form factor to the iPad mini. The second is the rumored new MacBook Pro, or as some people are calling it, the MacBook Ultra, where based on leaks and mounting evidence in macOS 27, it will be the first Mac ever to have a touchscreen. So with an iPhone that can basically turn into an iPad and a MacBook that will now have a touchscreen, where does that leave the iPad? Especially after Apple's recent price increases, people are going to expect more out of the iPad, especially for $1,200. So for this video, I want to talk about what we can expect for the future of the iPad as a product and how Apple can take it to the next level without abandoning what makes the iPad great. Well, one of the key strengths of the iPad is its accessibility to the wider market. That has always been the iPad's core strength, because if you know how to use an iPhone, which pretty much everyone on planet Earth does at this point, well, you know how to use an iPad. Honestly, it's likely the first Apple device most kids will use because they understand that touch-first interface. I mean, the term iPad kid is popular for a reason. Not saying it's a good reason, but there's a lot of kids using iPads. But that's not the only thing that makes the iPads Apple's gateway device. It's also its price point. Now, while the MacBook Neo has stole the headlines as being Apple's budget-friendly device, it is not cheap by any means. And the cheapest iPad you can buy is $450, which is almost $300 less than the MacBook Neo. And even though the Mac makes up a larger market share of overall revenue for Apple, it isn't as popular as the iPad in terms of raw unit sales. That's because a lot of the Macs that Apple sells are the very expensive configuration. So while they make up a higher portion of Apple's total revenue, they don't necessarily translate to total higher unit sales. Because if you look at the total unit sales, the iPad is estimated to be about twice as popular as the Mac. And in total active users, it may be 3 times as high as the entire Mac category. So even though on paper it might look like it's a little rough for the iPad, this is still a very popular device and still a very important product for Apple. So yes, first of all, Apple needs to keep this strategy going of having a cheaper iPad in the lineup. It is not only the easiest and most accessible device to use, but it is the most accessible product and the easiest to recommend for most users, even over the Neo. But this doesn't mean that Apple can just rest here. They need to upgrade this iPad to continue making it a clear value choice. And rumors do seem to indicate that we are due for an upgrade later this year that will make this iPad a better value with just one change, and that is that Apple will be taking the A16 chip in the current iPad and upgrading it to an A18 chip. Now, it's a boring upgrade, but it will bring one important and needed feature to this entry-level iPad, because right now, the A16 iPad is basically the only device that Apple sells that is not getting Apple Intelligence, which means it is not getting the new AI Siri. Putting the A18 in there solves that, and with the power of the A18 and 8 gigabytes of memory, even with the recent price hike, I think that we could argue that the iPad at this price point is still a good value. Still, just having the iPad be the cheap device doesn't really justify this product lineup as a whole for me, because the other thing that the iPad needs to keep the iPad a separate product is to have it continue to do things that only an iPad can do, and improving upon the iPad experience. One of those features is obviously writing and drawing with an Apple Pencil, something that even adding touch support to a standard MacBook wouldn't be able to replicate the experience of how well you can do it on an iPad. I still see a lot of artists that rely on an iPad over a Mac because of this core functionality. And the Apple Pencil for Pro users is obviously one of the key standout strengths for the entire iPad lineup. It is a really good experience. And you can make that experience even better if you are an Apple Pencil user by getting the new Paperlike 3 screen protector. Now, while this screen protector does protect your iPad's display, it does a lot more than that, because it also enhances it by covering it with tiny nano dots that create texture. If you haven't tried a Paperlike before, what this does is it basically adds a little resistance to the display, which gives you more precise control when drawing or writing. So if you have an Apple Pencil and hate how it currently writes on your iPad's slippery display, the Paperlike can fix that. To me, it makes it feel like using a regular pen or pencil on a very high quality piece of paper, and it even sounds like writing on paper, which I love the sound of. It's like ASMR for when you're writing. And the installation process is so easy because the Paperlike 3 comes with a butterfly installation method that makes applying the Paperlike fast and easy. So if you want your iPad's display to feel and sound like real paper, upgrade to the new Paperlike 3, and thank you to Paperlike for sponsoring this video. Now, looking into the future, I think Apple should continue to improve on the iPad's key strengths. And the biggest strength that the iPad continues to have is its display. Like, that is the whole point of the iPad, is you get a big, expansive, magical display that you can do anything on. And this display needs to be better than your iPhone, and it needs to be better than your Mac. And that is a problem for most of the iPad lineup, because right now only one iPad has a high quality display, and that is the iPad Pro, which is way too expensive for a lot of iPad users. So the thing that Apple should focus on for the next slew of upgrades for the other iPads is making sure that every single iPad has a great display. And the good news is, I think they're about to do just that, because there are rumors of the new iPad mini, which is coming out later this year. And right now, the iPad mini is often regarded as having the worst iPad display with its jelly scrolling issue. But this new iPad mini is rumored to be getting a major upgrade in the display department in two ways that I think will help separate it even from the iPhone Ultra. First of all, it is the first non-Pro iPad that is rumored to be getting an OLED display that will run at 120 Hz ProMotion, basically giving us the same display quality that is in every modern flagship iPhone. But then, and I think this is very important, the screen size on the iPad mini is also getting bigger. Now, hopefully this doesn't change the form factor too much, because I know people like the iPad mini because it's small, but I think Apple can accommodate this bigger screen mostly by just shrinking the existing bigger bezels on the mini, but the screen size is rumored to be increasing from 8.3 inches to around 8.7 inches. If these upgrades for the mini turn out to be true, well, that means you will get display quality that will match this rumored ultra expensive OLED iPhone Ultra, but then it will also give you a bigger screen size than that foldable iPhone, which is only rumored to be around 7.8 inches. So the separate device that you buy for the iPad mini is still going to end up being better than the 2-in-1 device. On top of that, it will still likely be cheaper to buy an iPad mini and say something like an iPhone 18 separately, which honestly, I could see being a better recommendation for most people. And yes, these OLED panel upgrades need to come to the entire mid-range iPad lineup. So while I'm happy to see this rumored for the mini, this upgrade also desperately needs to come to the iPad Air. Along with that, I think every iPad model should follow this iPad mini and increase its screen size. I would move the 11-inch iPads up to 12 inches, and I would take the 13-inch iPads and move them up to 14 inches. As phones get bigger and bigger, I think the tablet should too. Do not underestimate a big size OLED tablet in your hand. It is a beautiful thing to use. I say that as a 13-inch iPad Pro user. If you can bring that to all the iPads and make the screens even bigger, you can start with the Pro models first, but then bring it down to the Airs. I think a lot of people will enjoy that big screen experience, as long as you keep the form factor pretty lightweight and thin, which Apple has proven they can do with the iPad Pro models. For me, that is always the most important feature for the iPad. It is the screen, it is the experience of holding a big display in your hands, and that is something the iPad can continue to do well over the iPhones and even the Macs, because on the Macs, there's a keyboard attached to it. The screens are kind of like, technically a little farther away from your face. I think the iPad's strength really is just having a great display. And while yes, we've spent years making the iPad more pro with keyboard attachments, the core strength for the iPad is that tablet-first experience. So I think a way to really strengthen the iPad is to literally strengthen the iPad to be more durable. Now, I wouldn't make this more drop resistant. I mean, I would, but I think the big feature Apple should add for future iPads is to become more water resistant. Right now, doing that to a MacBook with a keyboard would be pretty hard, and foldable phones are known to be durability nightmares. So Apple making the iPads more durable, especially with water resistance, I think would be a really good selling feature, right? Like having the ability to take your iPad to the beach or the pool without worrying that if you drop it in the water, it's going to break. I think that would be an excellent feature for every iPad to have. And my favorite thing about the iPad remains its versatility. I love how it can be a tablet 1 minute, then go into full laptop mode the next. And I think Apple should lean into that versatility, especially as we see them roll out their new Siri AI features. Because we keep hearing about this separate home hub device from Apple, but what I think could be a really big selling standpoint for the iPad is if it had the versatility to transform into one of these home devices. And Apple already kind of has the system in place to do this with their smart connectors, which are on the back of the iPad Air and the iPad Pro. So what Apple could do here is sell a separate speaker base. Then you could put your iPad on it. That speaker base would charge your iPad, but then it would also give it a better speaker. And then it would transform your iPad to use as a smart home hub, where you can use voice commands with the new Siri to control your smart home, listen to music, watch videos, and ask it questions. And then when you take it off the hub, well, then it just turns back into a regular iPad. I think expanding the iPad into roles like that would keep its versatility alive and kind of make it that experience where the iPad can transform into anything, just like how it can transform from going into, like the tablet mode, being a regular iPad, putting on the keyboard case and transforming it into kind of like a laptop alternative. And now you can kind of transform it into a smart home device. But above all else, I think with the iPad, Apple needs to keep delivering on what it does great already on the higher end. And that is being an impossibly slim device that keeps pushing not only the power envelope, but the design envelope. And by combining together the ultimate screen technology, the iPad should keep trying to outdo the Mac. Just like how I think, like on the reverse, the Mac should keep trying to outdo the iPad. Like that's what made the Mac so great. They saw what the iPad was doing with the custom Apple silicon, and Apple was like, let's put that in the Macs, and it made the Macs a much better product. And that rough patch for the Mac led to what I think is like the best Mac lineup we've ever had. So right now, I think the iPad is in a similar rough patch, but I think out of it, Apple is going to deliver some really compelling upgrades for future iPads. Like I think we are going to see some really good improvements come to the entire iPad lineup for the next few years. But let me know, what do you think Apple should do with the iPad lineup? What features do you want to see added? And what changes would you make to make the iPad more compelling as a third device? As always, if you like the video, give me a like. If you want to see more, make sure you're subscribed. And thanks for watching. I'll catch you all in the next one.